Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're going to be talking about the Lord of the Rings series on Amazon, covering a story here written by the great John F. Trent over at Bounty into Comics, who is covering a story that was actually covered by Gary Nerdrotic, who is awesome. Cannot wait to be on Friday Night Tights later tonight. But before we get into this article and into this news about the Lord of the Rings series, please be sure to smash the like button, whether you're watching here on YouTube, over on Odyssey, or over on Minds.com. Those are the three places where I upload these videos. I would really appreciate it. Also, if you could subscribe as well, and also share this video, and check out the links in the description below to find out ways that you can help support the channel. It would really be greatly appreciated. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this news. As it says, YouTuber Nerdrotic warns that Amazon's Lord of the Rings is doomed before it gets out of the gate. This is something that we talked about just the other day on his anniversary stream. Once again, congratulations to Gary for just hitting 7 years over on YouTube. It's fantastic. But he's also talking about this and how there's a lot of really concern that they're going to try to push for, one, identity politics nonsense in the show, which, of course, as we all know, is completely against the vision that the really great J.R. Tolkien had in mind for the series, but also that the series itself might be doomed because of where their focus is going to be, and also what's going to be missing from this series, which I think is a very big thing to talk about. So let's go ahead and dive into it. It says, YouTuber Nerdrotic, aka Gary Beekler, warned his followers that Amazon's Lord of the Rings TV show is doomed before it even gets out of the gate. Beekler's warning comes after Amazon released a brand new synopsis for the series through Lord of the Rings fan site The One Ring. The synopsis begins, Amazon Studios' forthcoming series brings to screen for the very first time the heroic legends of the fabled second age of Middle-earth's history. This epic drama is set thousands of years before the events of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and will take viewers back to an era in which great powers were forged, kingdoms rose to glory and fell to ruin, unlikely heroes were tested, hope hung by the finest of threads, and the greatest villain that ever flowed from Tolkien's pen threatened to cover all of the world in darkness. It continues. Now, right off the bat, that sounds pretty badass to me. What the issue that I have with it is the fact that it's being called The Lord of the Rings, and yet it's not going to actually be based in what all of us know to be The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. And I think that is a major problem. So I think that one thing that they probably should start to do is to try and rebrand it, but Lord knows that they're using this type of branding because they recognize that people are going to know exactly what it's being referred to here. They're going to say, oh yeah, all that stuff with the hobbits and the One Ring, I want to see that. But the problem is that it seems that the story is going to be focusing on things that have very little, if at all, anything to do with those stories. And so even if they are able to get new viewers in, or to get viewers who are expecting to see a Lord of the Rings series, what they're going to end up getting instead is something completely different, which could very well kind of destroy the show, unless, of course, it is downright badass, which, of course, we still have to wait and see. It then reads, quote, beginning in a time of relative peace, the series follows an ensemble cast of characters, both familiar and new, as they confront the long-feared reemergence of evil to Middle-earth, end quote. So it seems to me that it's a retelling, or is essentially the Lord of the Rings with the Fellowship taking place at a different time in history so that they can bring in new and different characters. I don't think that's really the best way to go about it. Again, if you're going to name something The Lord of the Rings, and you're essentially going to be telling an ensemble story in that capacity, I don't know if doing that is especially, and again, if this is respecting the source material and following the stories that have been laid out by J.R.R. Tolkien, that is one thing. But if you're going to use those stories and essentially abuse them to create your own new narrative, and again, to push for woke nonsense, then no thank you. As someone that loves these stories, because my father read literally the Hobbit story to us, to me and my siblings when we were kids, countless times, read us the Lord of the Rings stories too. I have a very strong affection for these stories. I'm not an expert by any means, but my father literally still to this very day commemorates the birthday of Frodo and Bilbo Baggins. That is how much of a fan that he is. So to have something that was so precious to him, and therefore by extension precious to me, be dabbled with and potentially even screwed around with, really has me concerned and can easily get me pissed off if they go in certain directions with the story. It goes on. As the synopsis ends, it reveals a number of locations where the show will take place. Quote, from the darkest depths of the Misty Mountains, to the majestic forest of the elf capital of Linden, to the breathtaking island kingdom of Numenor, to the furthest reaches of the map, these kingdoms and characters will carve out legacies that live on long after they are gone, end quote. Again, that's all fine and dandy that they're going to be diving into these new locations, some again familiar, some not so familiar, but if their goal is going to be to try and push narratives, even though we know that they're going to try and strip, I imagine, anything that's even Catholic from this story, forgetting that this is an incredibly Catholic Christian-centric story in the first place, I think that could be a complete recipe for disaster. It goes on to say, Buechler notes that on the surface, this synopsis sounds good, right? As I mentioned earlier. He explains, quote, on the surface, it sounds pretty cool. We're going to see the elven smiths of Eregion forge the 19 rings of power, influenced by Sauron the Deceiver, who goes off to forge his own ring in Mount Doom. We are going to go inside the Misty Mountains. We are going to see the dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm, Moria in its prime. You saw it in Lord of the Rings in ruins. He goes on, and we might see the origin of the Nine, the Ringwraiths, the Nazgûl, who were all once kings of men who became slaves to Sauron's will, a fate worse than death. They mentioned the elf capital of Linden, which not too many people know about, and we are going to go to the fabled island of Numenor and possibly see it in its prime and possibly see its fall. Again, all of this stuff sounds pretty badass. As someone that is not as well versed on these stories, as someone that's not as well versed on these histories, I'm someone that actually really wants to at some point dive into a book like the Silmarillion, because I've heard great things about it. If you are a fan especially of Middle-earth and a fan of these histories, it's a great story to dive into, so I really want to dive into that one specifically. But it could be a really cool way of bringing all of these things that have existed and exist in the works of Tolkien onto the screen in the Amazon series in that way. And again, it could be really good, but as I mentioned even earlier, there does seem to be some reason to be concerned, especially even just from a plot perspective at the very least. Buechler then begins to explain why the Lord of the Rings series is already on faulty ground. He says, quote, this is going to be very different from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which are on-the-road stories, stories of companionship, stories that take place on journey. But this one is going to be set up like Game of Thrones. We're going to be following different characters in different locations who are going to converge on each other in the end. So essentially, it is telling individual stories leading to the culmination of them together. So actually, it will not be, as I said earlier, like Lord of the Rings in the capacity of it being like a fellowship, except at the very end. Now, is that meaning that after season 1, they're going to come together, and then from there in season 2 and 3 and onward, that they're then going to go on and be together as kind of this new makeshift fellowship? Again, I hope they don't do that, because I think that they have a really great opportunity here to tell stories from the mind of Tolkien the way that they should be told, and to bring now new stories and new characters to the minds and hearts of not only hardcore Tolkien fans, but also to new fans in the process as well. And I really hope they don't mess that up. It goes on to say that Buechler says, quote, they aren't going to have any hobbits. They aren't going to be any wizard. They are going to have, like I said, new characters and new lands. And that is where the big problem is. This is a giant blank canvas. This takes place over thousands of years, and that giant blank canvas is going to be filled with a couple of young, inexperienced showrunners. Does that sound a bit familiar to you? And those untested showrunners who have admittedly an experienced writer's room with writers from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are going to have to fill a lot of time with drama and relationship stuff, modern relationship stuff, and let's not even get into the dialogue, which you won't be able to adapt because there really isn't any like there is in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Buechler states. So again, they're going to be adapting a lot of these stories, and so they're going to have to essentially create their own dialogue from scratch, take and tell these relationship stories to try and fill in some of the gaps, as well as they're covering all of this rich history. And because you now have showrunners that are not experts, that have not taken on a thing like this before, or anything even close to it, even if you have the best writers in the world, as again he mentions, has it sound familiar, when we go back to Game of Thrones, we see that once those showrunners, who at that time all they had was Game of Thrones, which of course became very big, that once they were on their own, they fumbled and destroy the show to the point where I don't even want to go back to watch it in the first place. My real fear here is that they're going to take these stories and destroy them so much that it affects the original material that we are so used to seeing, like The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. I'm hoping and praying that's not the case. And if I hear that that is the case, then I might just say I'm not going to even watch it to hate watch it, because I don't want anything to tarnish my love of those stories and to tarnish those special relationships and those special moments from my own childhood and from my own life, just because I want to get some clicks on a video, right? I'm not going to do that if indeed that's what comes out. I'm probably going to actually listen very closely to Gary Beekler on this issue, because Nerdrotic is, in all seriousness, one of the best persons working right now in YouTube, in pop culture, in talking about comics, in talking about books, in talking about lore. And I'm going to trust whatever it is that he says on this issue, because he understands from a fan's perspective, especially when it comes to the story. He goes on to say, and makes a comparison to Game of Thrones. Quote, "As you all know, things were going great for Game of Thrones through season 4 until Dan and Dave passed up the books and they couldn't adapt George's dialogue anymore. And they tried to interpret what George might have wanted. And George is still alive. They could have asked him anything at any time, and they still produced the biggest disaster in television history." He then questions, "How do you think it's going to go for J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay over there? Obviously, they don't have J.R.R. Tolkien to talk to. They no longer have the greatest guardian of his father's work and one of the greatest sons who ever lived, Christopher Tolkien, to talk to either." End quote. And that is an excellent point. It seems right now that the people running the Tolkien estate do not nearly have as much desire to protect the work of J.R.R. Tolkien like Christopher Tolkien had. In fact, if you look to all of the works of Tolkien, Christopher Tolkien was a major part of getting a lot of these lost works, one, completed, or at the very least put out there in the form that they existed in. We don't have that anymore, which means that these people are going to have to make up essentially their own dialogue in many cases, and that is easily going to be cause for concern. It says here, the YouTuber then points to a rumor covered here on Bounding Into Comics. Nice plug, good sir. There was a shift in the direction of the show following Christopher Tolkien's death. Beekler states, quote, "Then, of course, there was the rumored big shift behind the scenes right after Christopher Tolkien's death. He died in January of 2020, and in March of 2020, it was rumored from the OneRing.net that a lot of writers were fired, and they rewrote Season 1, and they removed Tom Shippey, the Tolkien scholar." That is terrifying. When you take out someone who is a scholar in all things Tolkien and then rewrite and recast, that to me spells danger. Next, Beekler warns, quote, "And that brings us into the politicking. Are we going to get the nihilist, postmodern, intersectional Lord of the Rings? I think this is a good possibility considering everything we've seen from modern Hollywood. Then there's the fact that we already have a nihilist, postmodern Lord of the Rings, and it was called Game of Thrones." Beekler then recaps many of his concerns about the show, pointing to rumors of nudity, the hiring of an intimacy coordinator, the change in story structure, and the show being run by 2 former Bad Robot employees. He then adds a report that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos mandated Amazon create their own version of Game of Thrones. That report came from Variety, and they claimed, quote, "The mandate from Jeff Bezos is clear. Bring me Game of Thrones." That's the word that has the creative community buzzing this week about a major strategy shift underway from Amazon Studios' original series efforts. Finally, Beekler states, quote, "I'm not worried about Game of Thrones debauchery getting into Lord of the Rings. I'm more worried about the nihilism, the postmodernism. Like I've said before, it's infected Hollywood over the last few years. I don't think they are capable of telling a good story, a story of good versus evil, or a story of inspiration and hope when it comes to an already established franchise, see The Last Jedi." And I absolutely agree with Gary's take on this. Even though there is less likely a chance that there's going to be massive amounts of nudity and cursing like we saw in Game of Thrones, that is something where it was clearly based off of the actual source material, and they were able to then use that source material to justify those kinds of actions. That is not the case when it comes to the world that we see with Lord of the Rings and all of the other novels. As I said, this universe of Middle-earth is very much rich and deeply entrenched in Christian and Catholic theology. And so for them to try and add that kind of nonsense to the story would not only not work, it would also, I think, piss off so many people that they would end up losing key elements of their audience before the show could even really get off the ground. Not to mention, I think the bigger concern here is, of course, what Gary has pointed out to, which is the nihilism, the lack of hope, trying to create a darker version of this story without any sense of hope whatsoever. I think that is an absolute concern for us to have because of what we have seen in Hollywood, what we have seen when it comes to Game of Thrones, and what we have seen with the fact that what Jeff Bezos wants is like a Game of Thrones. Now, here is the big question. Are they going to go the route of Game of Thrones seasons 5 and up, or are they going to try and go first through Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 4? Are they going to respect the source material, use the source material to the best of their ability, and adapt it pretty damn well like they did in the beginning of Game of Thrones? Or are they going to go straight into the nonsensical crap that we got in those later seasons, not to mention the abysmal final season of Season 8, where had probably one of the worst series finales of all time, which destroyed every single character that they had been building up for years and years so badly that literally you have people that had forgiven all of the kind of weaker storytelling from seasons 4 on, and even they had given up on it because of how terrible that last episode was, my wife included in that. But anyway, Gary, I think, is totally spot on here. There is a lot for us to be concerned about. My hope and my prayer is that they don't do that. Again, when you get rid of someone like a scholar of all things Tolkien and you get rid of him and not replace him with anyone, that should leave us terrified. When you bring in people like an intimacy coach, that should also be terrifying, because that is not what this universe is about. Even if you go into the romance of characters like Aragorn and, oh my goodness, I'm blanking out, Arwen, right? Even if you go into the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen, that is something that, if you look to the books, it was not a huge focal point, right? It was not about their relationship. It was not about showing their relationship, I think, is the more accurate way of describing that. But if they're going to try and put modern-day relationships and modern-day politicking into Middle-earth, that's going to be a massive mistake. It's going to turn off the hardcore fans. And yeah, you might get your fun woke crowd that's going to say, ooh-wee, this is all so much fun. If you don't have that core fan base, look to what happened with Star Trek. Look at what happened with Doctor Who. Look at what's happening, of course, with Star Wars. It's only recently, because of shows like The Mandalorian, that fans have started to come back. But they lost their key fan base in Star Wars and all these other shows, and now they are lifeless. Now they are heartless. Do not do the same thing when it comes to this universe in Lord of the Rings, because that will be a major mistake, not just for you, but can also bring permanent damage to the Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien universe. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the matter. What are your thoughts? Have you seen Gary's video? Be sure to check it out and check out Nerdrotic's channel, because he is awesome. Also, be sure to check us out tonight on that channel for Friday Night Tights, where I'm sure we will talk about this among many other subjects. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Please smash the like button, make sure you subscribe, and also check out links in the description to find out where to follow me on social media and to support the channel. You guys rock. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my January 2021 Patreon and Subscribe Star members: Albertus Magnus, Ali C83, Andrew Hoyle, Animation Commentator Brian P, Dion, Divex, Enrique Evangelista, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, The Hunky Chunky Funky Monkey, Inflamed Wood, Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, J, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his beautiful twin with the beautiful hair, Orange Hat Reviews, On to June, Out of Step with Reality, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Steve Glasker, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B. Thank you very much for being my Patreon members. And also a huge shout out to my Subscribe Star peeps: Stan 4, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, Darkstar 57, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., US 888209 Fast, Dean Heiss, J-Rod the Beer Guru, Nevadan G. Adams, and ZK Man. You guys are all freaking amazing. Thank you so very much for being supporters. If you want your name shouted out, please consider joining on Patreon, where for $1 a month, you can get your name shouted out at the end of every single video and live stream. For $5 a month, you get access to that, and also you get access to exclusive giveaways, where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, digital codes, etc. $10 a month will get you all that, plus also access to a special podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. Lots of fun. We do Q&As from that as well, so you get access to asking those Q&As, asking us any wide variety of questions. And for $25 a month, you get all of that stuff, plus you get to be featured once a month on the Chosen of Valhalla live stream. And also for that first month, you get a free t-shirt shipped anywhere throughout the world. So if you want to consider any of those things, please check out the links in the description below where you can find my Subscribestar and Patreon and also other ways to support the channel. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.